A very warm welcome to everyone for joining us for Mazi o Mustaqbil, annual fest of Department of History, Lady Shri Ram Call. We are elated to have Ms. Sudha Tiwari today for the talk on shades of celluloid, tracing resistance in cinema. Ma'am is a teaching fellow at Ashoka University and a PhD student at the Center for Historical Studies, JNU. Her doctoral research focuses upon the social and cultural history of contemporary India through New Hindu cinema. She has been awarded a junior research fellowship from the Indian Council of Historical Research for her doctoral work. Before taking a PhD at JNU, Ma'am taught Indian and world history and mass media at various undergraduate colleges in Mumbai. At Yale, she looks to arrange film events that will generate a global and comparative discussion between Fox Fellows, students, and faculty. Without any further delay, we would now request Ma'am to kindly take over.
Good afternoon, everyone. A couple of thanks before I go to my talk today. At the outset, I want to thank Priyanka for reaching out to me with this invitation, much appreciated. Thank you also to LSR Department of History for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to the History Association, which seems to be very, very effective, particularly Anushka, Ayushi, Bidisha, and Surbhi, for all your messages and for pampering me in the last couple of days. So that felt really good. Today, I suppose that I have about 40-45 minutes to talk, right? Yeah, okay. So today in this presentation, I'll be sharing some thoughts with you on cinema as resistance. Let me go to present mode and start sharing my slide, my PowerPoint with you. Just give me a minute. Okay, for some reason I'm unable to bring my PowerPoint here. When I click on present now, the PowerPoint doesn't show. Is there any way to help me here? I can only see my my Chrome documents, you know.
Sudha, try clicking on the tab issue. Sorry, not the tab, window.
Okay.
And your PPT should be visible as one of the windows open on your laptop.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Is it visible to you guys? The PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Just let me go to slideshow. Alright, so as I said, today in this presentation, I'll be sharing some of my thoughts on cinema as resistance. And instead of talking about documentary films, I would shift the focus more towards feature films with a case study of 3 global film movements. These movements that occurred in Italy, Latin America, and India not only challenged the overtly capitalistic nature of filmmaking itself, but also came up with its own manifestos of making good cinema, resisting, as I said, the highly capitalist and profit-driven system of Hollywood. In the process, these movements tried to change the nature of filmmaking and as well as storytelling by bringing in a totally new grammar of film aesthetics. Before we delve into case studies, let me take you to 3 key moments from the year 2017 to bring back my point on cinema as resistance and connecting it to some of the debates which are happening in the present times, especially since last couple of years across the world. The first event that I want to discuss, share some details with you is this speech which one of the well-known film actors gave, this Meryl Streep's Golden Globe speech when she was accepting the Lifetime Achievement Award for her contribution to cinema. As we know that 2017, Trump had just been elected as president of USA, and in her speech, which got a very wide coverage from the press, from activists, from students across the world, she addressed in her speech a couple of people. She addressed Hollywood, she addressed foreigners and the press. In her speech, she says, and I want to quote portions of her speech, which is, again, I think very important for us to know about. And I'm quoting her. She says, "What is Hollywood anyway? It is just a bunch of people from other places. Hollywood is crawling with outsiders and foreigners. If you kick them all out, you will have nothing to watch but football and mixed martial arts, which are not the arts." Then she went on to make a couple of more very, very emphatic points, and I'm quoting her again. "This instinct to humiliate, when it's modeled by someone in the public platform, by someone powerful, it filters down into everybody's life because it kind of gives permission for other people to do the same thing. Disrespect invites disrespect. Violence incites violence. And the powerful use their position to bully others. We all lose." Then she again went on to talk about the press and how the press in the then USA was very important, to protect freedom and ideas of constitution. My purpose of sharing her speech was just to let you know how some of these some of the artists have been using some of these very glamorous platforms to bring some of these ideas which humankind has fought for decades and centuries to achieve. And then when these actors see them in threat, they use cinema, they use some of these platforms to voice their opinions. The second case that I wanted to share is again from around the same time, when a very famous, very well-known filmmaker from Iran, Asghar Farhadi, he decided to not attend the Oscar Awards of that year, which was supposed to happen in February and March. As we know, Asghar Farhadi had already won Oscar for his film called A Separation in 2012, and his other film called A Salesman was nominated for the category of Best Foreign Feature Film in 2017. But he decided to not attend the ceremony because he wanted to protest against President Donald Trump's 90-day visa ban for citizens from several Muslim countries, including Iran. The order had also imposed a 120-day blockage for Muslim refugees with an indefinite ban on all refugees from Syria. This was again, this was a very bold step from Farhadi, which was again talked quite a bit among various circles. I want to quote a little bit from two of his statements which he gave when he decided not to attend the Oscar award ceremony, and which he gave at, of course, online. He gave these statements online when London, the mayor of London, decided to screen his film publicly for the people, and also to show solidarity with some of these Muslim countries and Muslim refugees who were banned by Trump's administration. So when he received the news that his film, A Salesman, has received the award for best feature film in the foreign language category, he joined the screening in London via a video link, and he said something which is pretty beautiful for us to know. And I'm quoting him: "Dividing the world into the us and our enemies categories creates fear, a deceitful justification for aggression and war. These wars prevent democracy and human rights in countries which have themselves been victims of aggression." And then he goes on to say, "Filmmakers can turn their cameras to capture shared human qualities and break stereotypes of various nationalities and religion. They create empathy between us and others, an empathy which we need today more than ever," unquote. Let me take you back after USA and Iran and London. Let me take you back to something that was happening. This is again a picture from the open public screening of his film in London around the same time when at the Oscar the award was announced and he had won the award. And this is when he was addressing the audience via online link. Now let me take you back to something that was happening in some towns in Tamil Nadu and Kerala around the same time, in the same month, February, March up to June. So a very dedicated Dalit communist filmmaker, documentary filmmaker Divya Bharati made a film called Kakkos, narrating the story of manual scavenging and connecting it with the deeper debates of caste system in India. And her documentary also exposed how the administration is also involved into not getting rid of this evil practice of Kakkos. The documentary was made in Tamil language. It was supposed to be released on theaters in 2017, but she was facing a lot of issues with censor board, and the Tamil Nadu police and the police at the states or towns wherever she would go to screen the film would create problems. They would prevent her from screening her film. Why? Because they feared that the film will create law and order situation. In this situation, in this circumstance, what Divya did, Divya went ahead and released the film on YouTube for free, and anybody can access the film for free. She took that bold step of not worrying about censorship, not worrying about any profiting, not worrying about how many people will watch it or not. She used the best possible option of breaking some of those barriers of filmmaking, distribution and exhibition, or even censorship for that matter. She went ahead and released her film on YouTube. So why did I mention these three acts? I just wanted to bring to your notice that these three acts and their actors, they were though divided by continents, they were also divided by privileges of class and race. But what unites these three artists was their will to resist and their will to use cinema as a weapon of resistance against oppression, which was happening around them.
So sorry to interrupt, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, your slides are not changing.
You can't see my slides?
Yes, ma'am. Only the first slide is visible. I guess you might be changing the slides.
Yeah, I'm changing the slide. So, is it visible now?
Now it's changed, yeah.
Now it is visible. All right. So I think I'll keep it like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just stop me, like, whenever you see that something is amiss on the screen. Yeah, because I can't see you guys. I can only see my slides right now. Okay, sure. Yeah. So with these three important details, like from USA, from Iran, and India, let me take you back in time. Something like that my research has been all about. Let me take you back to the 1940s, 50s, and 1960s, and try to talk to you about a category of cinema which we call as art cinema. Though many of the practitioners of this kind of cinema has often disassociated themselves with this nomenclature. When I'm doing in this particular part of the presentation, I'll try to suggest that the idea of cinema as resistance and the idea of a political cinema go hand in hand. Also, for the purpose of this presentation, I will only limit to the discussion on how some of these cinematic movements desired and demanded a different aesthetics of making cinema, and they also kind of succeeded in carving a niche for themselves. So I am again taking you back to three different continents: Europe, Latin America, and coming back to our own South Asia, our own country. So these are the three things which I will be highlighting in this part of the presentation, where we will see that some of these filmmakers used cinema to create not just consciousness, but also some sort of a resistance, not just against their own system of filmmaking, but also in the sense of bringing stories from everyday life, from working classes and other marginalized stories onto the screen. So first I will briefly talk about Italy, Italian neorealism, which was very reformist in its nature. Then we will go to discuss the concept of cinema novo and third cinema, which happened in parts of Latin America, especially Brazil, which was more revolutionary in nature. Finally, I'll be concluding by sharing some details, some information on India, where we saw in the 1960s, 70s, and up to the 1980s, we saw a different kind of movement emerging, which was popularly referred to as New Cinema, with capital N and capital C, which tried to combine the elements of both the movements, the Italian neorealism, as well as some of the filmmakers of New Indian cinema tried to be inspired or affected or impacted by Latin American cinema novo and the movement of third cinema. Though largely Indian new cinema is inspired by Italian neorealism, but we have some filmmakers who were very much influenced by Brazil or Latin American new cinema also. So I hope some of you may be knowing or may have heard or may have read, if not watched, may have heard about this very famous representative film of Italian neorealism called Bicycle Thief. It came around in 1948. 1948 is the same period when the world has just seen the end of Second World War, and we had seen all the horror. To tell you a little bit about this, it is not only important for us to understand these movements, but it is also for themselves, but it is also important for us to understand because many of our filmmakers, not just in the 1960s, but even now, if you talk to them, for example, Anurag Kashyap, etc., they do go back to some of these films for inspiration, and they have been inspired by aesthetics of Italian neorealism, and some of these filmmakers have directly affected the way they make cinema or the way they think about making cinema, bringing stories onto celluloid or onto screen. For example, as you can see on the screen, this is a screenshot from a film. And what I want to let you know is Indian filmmakers, including our master Satyajit Ray himself, have confessed time and again to have been influenced and inspired by this film, Bicycle Thief. In an interview, Gautam Ghosh, who made films in Bengali as well as in Hindi, he also confessed how, when he saw Bicycle Thieves in a film society, he was absolutely moved and shaken. It was a dramatic change from the kind of films I was used to. It introduced me to realism, to the power of the medium, unquote. Briefly, if somebody wants to know what exactly were the moving features of Italian neorealism. So Italian neorealism was marked by a total disenchantment with Mussolini's leadership, the way he handled domestic affairs, and also the whole idea of fascism. It was also very importantly marked by disenchantment with Italian commercial films, which only imitated American comedies. Now, the word American here is very, very important because we will see that all the three film movements that I'm going to briefly discuss with you today is directly kind of a resistance towards the American Hollywood system of filmmaking. So the complaint of some of these filmmakers who would become the pioneer of Italian neorealism was also against the American system of making films, which were hardly interested into sharing stories of working class. It was also, one of the important features was also that it it had a strong urge to create films relevant to the public and not just relevant to the market or to box office. Lastly, the Italian neorealism was also marked by taking to the streets, going to the streets with minimal equipment, using non-professional actors instead of star cast, and an unbreakable belief in their socio-political purpose. So we see that minimalism and mission, a purpose are two very key important features of Italian new realism. But before we proceed to share a couple of things about Brazilian and Latin American new cinema, I want to share a bit about French New Wave. This is a picture from one of its again representative films called The 400 Blows. It's a must-watch film. If you have not watched it, I'll highly recommend to you. This is a screenshot from the same film. I just want to tell you a couple of things about French New Wave, which again was contemporary of Italian neorealism, though it was slightly different in the sense French New Wave gave too much importance to authorship, too much importance to the director. Whereas Italian neorealism was quite a bit about what goes on the screen. How you are telling your story. That was more important in Italian neorealism. But yeah, that said, French New Wave was also one of the important cinema movements which resisted the American Hollywood kind of filmmaking. What exactly was French New Wave? In spite of all the government efforts, and this is again, the context is in the post-Second World War society. In spite of all the government efforts, there was a sense of dissatisfaction with regard to the aesthetics of French cinema. A new generation of French filmmakers spread over the Cinema Institute, the Cinémathèque, and the film press had high dreams and ambitions. Then came a specialized magazine in 1951, which is widely credited to have roused French public opinion in favor of the much-awaited evolution in the French cinema. It was founded by André Bazin. It's a very important name. And by 1959, the impact of revolutionary new wave was felt after, Truffaut's The 400 Blows, which was released in 1959, won the prize for Best Direction and won the Golden Palm at the Cannes Film Festival. According to film critics, and I'm quoting one of them, we are face to face with something new. Something has changed in the French film. The atmosphere appears new and is glowing with a kind of renaissance, unquote. Individualism, freedom of conception, and non-conformity in working methods were highlighted as some of the main characteristics of the French new wave. These are characteristics which are I think universal with all these new film movements which are happening in the post-Second World War time. Individualism, freedom of conception, and non-conformity. The desire for an alternative cinema, at least in Europe, with Italian neorealism and French New Wave, seems to have been a direct result of the post-World War II economic crisis. Before a couple of because we are historians here, many of our historians, and we are kind of obsessed with contextual study of anything and everything. So before I go to the slides or the part on new Latin American cinema, let me just give you some sense of what exactly was happening in 1950s and 60s, which may have given rise to a different kind of thinking on the part of some of these filmmakers across the world. So we see that by 1950s and 60s, the process of decolonization or demand for decolonization in Africa had already begun. Situation in Latin America was pretty politically volatile, with USA being accused and also interfering in all the affairs of various Latin American nations, because Cold War had already begun, and communism and capitalist democracy were kind of fighting a war. And Latin America was one of the stages of Cold War. The Battle of Algiers, where France got unnecessarily involved, was around, and all kind of horror stories were coming from there. We know how for about 20 years, the Vietnam War went on, and it gave rise to a different kind of intellectual thinking, different kind of rationalism was like taking root, not just in USA but across the world. So I remember that when I interviewed one of these very important filmmakers of Indian new cinema, Saeed Akhtar Mirza, he would tell me that how as young people in his family, his parents, etc., would switch on the radio, and the radio will give news about Vietnam War, and how as a growing up person, as an adolescent, he would feel angry and upset with whatever was happening in Vietnam, and that like definitely molded, shaped many of their ideologies, which definitely comes up in their cinema as well. So Vietnam War also led to a lot of student movements across America. We must be aware. The audience here must, I'm sure, is aware about the whole May 1968 Paris student movement. And of course, coming back home, we must be also aware about the whole Naxalbari movement, which started in West Bengal in the 1960s and 70s. And we know how filmmakers like Gautam Ghosh and Mrinal Sen were very deeply influenced, affected by some of these happenings. So with that, a brief discussion on the contextual study of 1960, there were certain questions which all these happenings, events gave rise to, especially with regard to connection of film and society. And many of these filmmakers were not just filmmakers, but they were excellent writers. And some of the best writings on cinema, on philosophy of cinema, on theory of cinema has come up from some of these filmmakers themselves, So there were certain questions which they were battling with, which they were asking themselves, which they were asking them the medium that they wanted to practice. What is the relationship of film to society? Is there a correct radical form as represented by the French New Wave, or is radical content as represented by the Italian neorealism enough? Questions like, is the film medium itself ideologically loaded? Questions like, what is the relationship between theory and practice of cinema? Questions like, who is the intended audience for politically radical cinema, or audience for cinema of / as resistance? Some of these key questions came up in the 1960s in the background of these historical events, epoch-making, if I can use that phrase, events which were happening in 1960s and 70s, which were going to largely impact, and it is a universally accepted fact, many of these filmmakers have said how events in 1960s across the world changed the way they thought about society, about world, about politics, about cinema. And we see that one of the most clear impact of these events of 1960s was carried forward by cinema in Brazil, by the new Latin American cinema, which we refer to as Cinema Novo, or sometimes it is also called as third cinema. And it is more revolutionary in nature and not liberally, progressively reformist. It goes a couple of steps ahead. What exactly was happening here? So in 1968-69, two names come on the map: Octavio Getino and Fernando Solanas. They make a 4-hour-long documentary in Spanish called The Hour of the Furnaces, which was not really released in 1968, but it was smuggled. It was made with a lot of difficulties. It was smuggled in different areas because the government wouldn't let it go out. And they faced a lot of issues with regard to not just the production of the film, but also the exhibition of the film. They wrote an article supporting, sharing their thoughts on what they mean by third cinema. It became kind of a manifesto for that generation of filmmakers which wanted to make revolutionary cinema. This school of cinema, criticized the French New Wave. They also were not in support of Italian neorealism, and because they thought that both these European cinematic movements do not really try to subvert the system, which was kind of a purpose of the new Latin American cinema filmmakers. This is a cover of the CD of this film which KP Nuan Solanas made, The Hour of the Furnaces. If possible, I'll advise, I mean, maybe if you can't watch the entire 4 hours, but if possible, do go and check on YouTube some of its clippings. It's very important, especially I think for the historians to, if not from the filmic perspective, from the history perspective, I highly recommend this documentary for people who are pursuing history, who have interest in history. Let me just also give you a little bit of more information on the new Latin American cinema. But before that, I would like to share this small clipping where we hear Getino talking about cinema of liberation, the third cinema that they wanted to practice. Please let me know if the audio and video are fine and if you can watch it without any interruption.
Bueno, uno de los problemas que nosotros nos planteábamos a nivel teórico es el de un tercer cine. Este surgía como alternativa a lo que sería el primer cine, que para nosotros es el cine americano, el cine de las grandes multinacionales, el cine que domina la mayor parte de todas las pantallas del mundo. Como alternativa a este primer cine, nosotros ubicábamos un segundo cine, que era un cine de autor, un cine de indagación psicologista, en alguna medida también social, un cine que trataba de reformar las estructuras dominantes, pero que no profundizaba quizá en términos adecuados el conocimiento de la realidad de nuestras sociedades y de nuestros países. Nosotros proponíamos un tercer cine que era un cine ya mucho más profundo y que no era solamente político en sus términos así estrictos, sino que apuntaba sobre todo a un conocimiento mayor, a un compromiso mayor y a una nueva relación también con los espectadores, con el público.
Towards a Third Cinema was a manifesto authentically based on the radical practices of its authors. Solanas and Getino were co-directors of a mammoth 3-part, 4-hour experimental film, The Hour of the Furnaces. Made in the middle 60s, they described it as an act before being a film, an act of liberation. It was shown widely but clandestinely, in small meetings and in sections, as circumstances permitted. It was constructed in such a way that it could be stopped in the projector to allow for discussion. It reached the Pesaro Film Festival in Italy in that notable year 1968, where it caused a sensation.
Compañeros, esto no es solo la exhibición de un film, ni es tampoco un espectáculo. El film es el pretexto para el diálogo, para la búsqueda, para el encuentro de voluntades. Es un informe abierto que lo ponemos a la consideración de ustedes para debatirlo tras la proyección. Importa sobre todo crear este espacio unitario, este diálogo de la liberación. Nuestras opiniones valen tanto como las de ustedes.
Nosotros en principio no creemos que exista un solo modelo para el cine, como no existe un modelo para la liberación de un país, un modelo para la política, un modelo para la cultura. No creemos en los modelos únicos, exclusivos y acabados. Creemos que cada país y cada proceso desata modelos nuevos, originales, y que ahí está la riqueza, el proceso, la vitalidad del desarrollo de la humanidad en su conjunto y de cada sociedad. En este aspecto nosotros recuperamos todas las posibilidades, incluso todos los modelos posibles de cine, y los tratamos de experimentar para que el propio proceso mismo y la experiencia que nosotros estemos llevando a cabo a través de ellos permita ir decantando, seleccionando aquellos que son más valiosos para el desarrollo integral de cada sociedad y población. Nosotros creemos que un cine, a través de la pantalla de cine, puede ser un arma de liberación también. Depende del momento, depende del uso, depende de la política que rija en ese momento en ese país. También creemos que un cine militante es un arma formidable y creemos que el cine super 8 lo es, como las nuevas formas de comunicación, el videocassette, los nuevos recursos audiovisuales. Todos los recursos pueden ser válidos. El problema es que en abstracto no se puede valorar uno por encima de otro. Creemos que desde una política integral que conduzca la cultura y la vida de un país, es de donde se debe de determinar cuáles son las armas más importantes, los medios más importantes en cada momento, en cada espacio, para que esto contribuya al desarrollo real o a la liberación real del país.
So I think maybe you must have noticed how he is saying that how screen can be used as an arm of liberation. So this is deeply rooted in one can say Leninist communist ideology, and as I said, like Latin America was one of the theaters of Cold War politics, and it's not a surprise that a bunch of filmmakers in Latin America would think of cinema or screen or video cassettes or medium of communication in this particular way. Trying to connect the Latin American cinema with some of the filmmakers that we may know. As I said earlier, I mentioned earlier that some of our filmmakers like Mrinal Sen, and if you see his Calcutta trilogy, and if you see some of the documentaries made by Anand Patwardhan, or a very famous filmmaker from Kerala, John Abraham, his film Amma Aryan, I think a copy, not a very good copy, but it's available on YouTube. Or just read about the whole making of Amma Aryan, how he makes the film. If you watch some of these documentaries and films from these Indian filmmakers, you will see a clear influence of the cinema of liberation of Latin America. And these filmmakers have acknowledged their debt to some of these filmmakers from Latin America in various interviews. This is a screenshot from a very important documentary which Anand Patwardhan made in 1974, and I intentionally wanted to refer to it. Of course, we talk quite a bit about emergency in different circumstances, and if you have not watched it, I will advise that perhaps this is the right time to go back to this documentary and also read up about it, the stories. Patwardhan has his own website called patwardhan.com, where you can read what kind of struggle he faced with regard to the screening and shooting of this documentary in 1974-75, right on the eve of emergency. Let me go to the sort of the second final theme that I wanted to discuss today, our own new Indian cinema. So as I said earlier, the new cinema with capital N and capital C tries to combine the elements of reformism as well as revolutionary elements of Latin American cinema. And one of the earliest researchers who worked on Indian new cinema, Meera Binford, she called this movement as the movement of dissent, finding its existence as a paradox amidst dominant commercial cinema. I want to mention or point out to a couple of texts which became the guiding principle, or which became sort of a manifesto for the filmmakers of late 1960s, 70s and 80s in India. Satyajit Ray, at the age of 27, wrote a very important essay titled "What is Wrong with Indian Film." This is this is much before Pathe Panchali would be shared with us. The second document which I would like to briefly mention to you is this, actually a proper official manifesto of the new cinema movement, written by Arun Kaul and Mrinal Sen in 1968. These two documents and a whole lot of discourse which was happening in 1960s, when a bunch of Indian young filmmakers exposed to world cinema were questioning commercial cinema of India, and how some of these texts, along with those public discourses, became the guiding text for the creation of what we know today as FTII, the National Film Archive of India, and the Film Finance Corporation, or the National Film Development Corporation, which was made in 1975. These institutions, these texts, these institutes, these archives have become the central focal point of India's new cinema movement. According to Saeed Akhtar Mirza, FTII had become a springboard, and the corporation which supported with finances these young filmmakers was at the heart of the new cinema movement. For Mirza, these were culture centers which allowed one to break barriers. Now, those are important words there. What exactly Satyajit Ray said in his essay when he was questioning the the then contemporary Indian cinema. And I want to quote him, I want to share this important portion of that write-up. He says, what the Indian cinema needs today is not more gloss, but more imagination, more integrity, and a more intelligent appreciation of the limitations of the medium. He goes on to say, it is only in drastic simplification of style and content that hope for the Indian cinema resides. The raw material of the cinema is life itself. It is incredible that a country which has inspired so much painting and music and poetry should fail to move the filmmaker. He has only to keep his eyes open and his ears. Let him do so, unquote. So again, we see that he's not talking about star system, he's not talking about money, he's talking more about imagination on the part of the filmmaker and also on the part of the viewer, the audience also. What exactly was written in the manifesto of New Cinema, which I regard as some sort of a resistance, you know, what exactly Mridul Sen and Arun Kaul wrote. And I want to quote them. No prize for guessing, they were very unhappy with how Indian films were being made at that point of time. How they define new cinema, what was their vision for a new cinema with capital N and capital C in India. It's a little big quotation and I would like to read it out for all of you. New cinema looks upon a film as the personal expression of an individual artist. New cinema aspires to the conditions in which a film would bear the distinct stamp of the creative artist behind it and not of a studio. New cinema stands for film with a signature. New cinema engages itself in a ruthless search for the truth as an individual artist sees it. New cinema lays stress on the right questions and bothers less about the right answers. New cinema believes in looking fresh at everything, including old values, and in probing deeper everything, including the mind and conditions of man. New cinema seeks the clues to mankind's riddles in men's personal relationships and private worlds. New cinema encourages filmmakers to bring to their work in improvisation, spontaneity, and youthful enthusiasm. Lastly, they say, new cinema expects of its audience the kind of participation and involvement which modern art demands, unquote. Let me take about 5 to 7 minutes more and take you through what exactly was happening in 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and how exactly this whole category of art cinema is different and maybe and can be, as I have tried to argue, is a form of resistance itself. So the moment, I mean, of course, before 1969, Satyajit Ray had already fully blown, as one of these most important filmmakers of our country. He had won awards. The world had seen Pather Panchali. But 1969 is a very special year when it comes to the new cinema movement. 3 films were released in this year called Bhuvan Shom, Sara Akash, and Uski Roti. And all the 3 films, if you see film language of what we call as film grammar, are pretty different from each other, you know, but they still led to one common movement against the so-called commercial film industry based in Bombay. Bhuvan Shom was made by Mridul Sen, Sara Akash was made by Basu Chatterjee, and Uski Roti, which is one of the most difficult but one of the most controversial also for being a difficult film, was made by Mani Kaul. Some of you may be aware of it. If you are not, I would advise that go and check some of these films. This is a poster from Bhuvan Shom, and when Bhuvan Shom was released, for all its novelty and novelty of thought of the filmmaking, low budget, non-star cast, and using real life locations in Gujarat, bringing rural stories onto the screen. Something like this was perhaps happening for the first time. And there is no comparison between Bhuvan Shom and Pather Panchali. Pather Panchali deals with rural areas of poverty in a very, very different, with a very different camera gaze. That was very, very different the treatment which Mrinal Sen gave to rural areas or to rural India was very different in Bhuvan Shom. And critics regarded Bhuvan Shom as the antithesis of all that is meretricious, escapist, formula-ridden, and unrealistic in Hindi films. But exactly, if one wants to summarize some of the features of the new cinema, it can be summarized as opposition to commercial cinema. They were the rightful heirs of neorealism. They emphasized quite a bit on themes of tradition and change. They also assigned a political role to cinema in trying to transform India into a more equitable society. They also worked towards, demanded, and desired more censorship liberalization. Lastly, they all were up for stylistic diversity and aesthetic innovation. Who and where exactly was this new cinema movement occurring? So in Bengal, in East India, if I can give you some representative names, there are many filmmakers and many films have been made which can be regarded or which can be clubbed under this broader category called new cinema, art cinema, or parallel cinema. So I'm giving you just three of a couple of other names. Satyajit Ray, Ritwik Ghatak, and Mrinal Sen are the representative voices from Bengal, along with Tapan Sinha and Gautam Ghosh. When we turn south, we have names like Adur Gopalakrishnan, John Abraham, Girish Karnad, and Girish Kasravalli. When we come to West India, Bombay-centric film industry, we have Shyam Benegal, Govind Nilani, Saeed Akhtar Mirza, MS Sathyu. Satyu's film Garam Hawa is pretty popular among history societies because whenever we discuss partition of India, we always go back to that film. Muzaffar Ali, Ketan Mehta, Kundan Shah, and Kamal Swarup. These are some of the names who made films mostly in Hindi. Though Shyam Benegal has made a couple of films in Kannada also, if I'm not wrong. I am going to skip this portion. I am, I think, lagging behind time. This is just kind of a projection. I thought to give you some sense of what exactly we mean. Again, this is a very broader, generalized slide that I have used. There are problems in it, but just to give you a sense about the depiction of women in new cinema and depiction of women in commercial cinema, and how and why one should perhaps be more important for our discourses. So if you have not watched Mirch Masala yet, I would highly recommend that film to you now. And Mirch Masala was made by Ketan Mehta in 1987. I wanted to show you this clipping, which has a list of films which can be categorized under new cinema, which was supported by NFDC, but I think I'm short of time, so I'm going to skip this. But I hope I have given some sense, at least some sense to you, what exactly new cinema is all about and why and how it should be regarded as a cinema of resistance and cinema as resistance. Few more mentions of a few more filmmakers, and here I think I would like to take maybe a couple of minutes more. So Akrosh was made by Govind Nilani and in late 1970s, and I would like to share a couple of things that was going on in his mind. Who inspired him? What exactly he believed on cinema? So he was tremendously affected by films like Red Shoes, Lust for Life in the 1950s. After coming in contact with Western cinema, he realized a whole world opens up. There is more to cinema than just stories. An intense interest in color and photography grows, unquote. Then he read Sergei Eisenstein's book called Notes of a Film Director, which was written in 1946. And it was another revelation to him. And I want to share this quote with you. He says, cinema is not 2 plus 2 equals 4, 2 plus 2 equals 5 or 50 or 700. Cinema is not mathematics, it is magic, unquote. He also was very influenced by Ritwik Ray, Akira Kurosawa, Ingmar Bergman, Andrei Tarkovsky. Cinema for him, he said, was a medium of art where he employed space, time, color, movement, word, sound, music, give vision to his inquiry into the human condition. The word human condition is very, very central to many of these filmmakers across Italy, France, and Latin America, and in India also. Muzaffar Ali's Gaman is also like a highly recommended film, and one should watch it. And there's also I think is one of the defining moments of how the aesthetics of new cinema itself was changing from 1969 to 1978. And the story behind the making of this film is very, very interesting in the sense, if just to tell you one point is, Muzaffar Ali was very young. This was his first film, and he approached many private producers with the story for financing, and they refused among various reasons that they gave him for refusing to support this film. One point was that the central hero is a Muslim, and they can't really give him money because it will be a flop. Nobody would like to see a film which has a Muslim protagonist, and that too a poor Muslim protagonist, unlike maybe Mughal Azams, So he shared this story over a interview, and it is printed and it is recorded. So this was just shared with you to just let you know how for many of us, many of these filmmakers come across as belonging to this English-speaking elite urban people. But when you talk to them, when you read their interviews, we see that they are also kind of marginalized when it comes to support or financial support is concerned. So they have seen a different kind of marginalization at the hands of the commercial film industry. Again, in 1990s, some of the shades of this new cinema movement continued till middle 1990s. So one of the representative films of 1990s of new cinema could be Kalpana Lajmi's Rudali. Again, highly recommended. And before ending this presentation today, I deliberately, intentionally wanted to share this information about one of my all-time favorite films, Naseem, made by Saeed Akhtar Mirza. It was released in 1995 in the background of the Babri Mosque demolition. And this is a screenshot from the beginning of his film. It became like an epigraph, and for a long time, every 6th December, the university campuses, college film societies would screen this film, and the treatment that he has given to the entire issue by sharing the story of a middle-class Muslim family living in Bombay on the eve of the Babri Mosque demolition is unmatched. So yeah, final words and maybe a couple of minutes more. So again, talking about the whole category of art cinema, I want to go back to this beautiful essay written by David Bordwell in 1979, where he talks about the category of art cinema, which it has just started emerging and blooming in global cinema as such. So he tells us that how the concept of happy endings is totally absent from art cinema. And art cinema challenges the whole concept of happy endings. And he gives us an example from Italian film Bicycle Thief, which we just discussed. How in the film The Future of Antonio, which is the central character, and his son is not revealed at all. The viewer, the audience can make his or her own conclusions. He beautifully says in this essay that art cinema, and I'm quoting him, is a cinema of psychological effects in search of their causes. According to Bordwell, and I really want to read out this quotation to you, a banal remark of the 1960s that such films make you leave the theater thinking is not far from the mark. The ambiguity, the play of thematic interpretation must not be halted at the film's close. Furthermore, the pensive ending acknowledges the author as a peculiarly humble intelligence. He knows that life is more complex than art can ever be, and the only way to respect this complexity is to leave causes dangling, questions unanswered. With the open and arbitrary ending, the art film reasserts that ambiguity is the dominant principle of intelligibility, that we are to watch less for the tale than the telling, that life lacks the neatness of art, and this art knows it. To conclude finally, and I want to use some words from the concept note that was shared from LSR History Association. Art cinema accepts that it is an imperfect world. It does not attempt to make it perfect. In that sense, yes, it may not be the most radical in its approach, but it is also not a status quoist cinema as some of us would suggest. On the contrary, as we have seen, art cinema goes out in the street, takes the camera right in the life of its characters, makes a serious, integrated approach to ponder, probe, and provoke thoughts on human condition and what is its goal, if human life has a goal at all. Art cinema, in that sense, thrives and survives on resistance. Thank you very much. I took quite a bit of your time.
Thank you so much. So to showcase how the filmmakers has used their art as a to showcase the resistance. That was really wonderful. Now we would like to open the floor for the questions. If you have any question or any observation, you can write down that in the chat box, or you can.
Can I ask a question if no one else has a...
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Anushka, you want to go ahead first?
No, sir, you can go ahead. Anushka Saxena, okay.
Okay.
You can go ahead. Anushka, why don't you ask and then Pankaj sir can follow up.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Pankaj sir. Thank you so much. Sudha ma'am, that was absolutely insightful. But the question that I have is concerning the artist's perspective on making this art that is cinema, right? So, ma'am, I want to know from you, how does a cinematographer or a director, while writing and scripting their work, draw the line of difference between what can be considered activism art, what can be considered the actual life of people who are struggling with something, and what is propaganda, or what can be shown as propaganda to influence the ideology of the masses?
Should I answer this, or maybe I can pick up one or two other questions? I can collect a couple of more questions and then answer. I think Pankaj wanted to ask me something.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, I have just a couple of small queries. One is, you mentioned the new neo-realist cinema, De Sica and Fellini. I was also thinking about the French films, particularly, someone like Godard, for example, who has also been hailed as one of his films, I don't know how to pronounce it, Spinoza. That one has been hailed as one of the best protest films of the time. But, my question is, as a visual medium, when I look at the neo-realistic cinema, whether Apu trilogy or De Sica or Fellini, it's a little, isn't it a little too soft, a little too aestheticized, especially its cinematography. Ray has been criticized, as I'm sure you are aware of, for making a pornography of poverty. So that's one query. The other is you seem to relate to the new cinema in India almost as equal to the new neo-realist cinema because some of the people you refer to in the new wave cinema, including Ghatak and Ray, were actually, making films in the 1950s, whereas the new wave cinema, even the manifesto you quoted is from 68. And broadly, we usually locate it in the 60s, right? In the mid or the late 60s. So I was wondering whether you sort of did it deliberately. And lastly, the new wave cinema, the new cinema, particularly those which were made in Hindi, I think, should we not make a distinction between those films made by people like Gautam Ghosh in Hindi, or people like Govind Nihlani, for that matter. Looking at films like Party or Saransh, their language is so alienating. I mean, that is a language that only Hindi teachers in school classrooms and All India Radio studios speak. So, in many ways, that you read, for example, which puts so much of emphasis on personal signature, imagination, this vague, almost ontological reference to truth, instead of referring to social dissensions, to how the camera can. I mean, in that sense, Ketan Mehta is probably different from others. His camera roves around much more sharply than, or for that matter, even Govind Nihlani, especially when he was more of a cinematographer than a director. So I'd just like to know your thoughts about that. Thanks. And thank you for a wonderful talk, very comprehensive treatment.
May I, Anushka, may I ask a question as well?
Yes, of course, Prabha ma'am. Please.
Okay, I second Pankaj's opinion about your talk. Dr. Tiwari, absolutely wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I just had to, I have seen many of the films that you refer to, particularly those which were made, the Hindi films and some Malayalam films that were made post-emergency through the 1970s and 1980s. That had a different kind of a feel, I think, particularly because they were coming out of that, the darkness of 2 or 2 years. But they were not uniformly lauded as wonderful, because precisely at that point of time, through the decade of the late 70s and 80s, the women's movement was also very strong, and it was coming up in a very strident kind of a way in many parts of India. And they had serious concerns about the way in which these filmmakers were projecting or presenting women in this. For instance, even Akrosh was seriously criticized by many women at that point of time. I would appreciate your comments on that.
Any other questions? Not really. I think I should just go ahead and try to answer some of them. Okay, at the outset, let me just make a confession that I kind of have a soft corner towards the kind of cinema which I just show. So maybe some of my, and it was very difficult for me to write the PhD thesis. And pursue this whole complete objectivity and not bring in my subjectivities in this. But yeah, some of the questions which you have asked, I have dealt with them minutely or in a major way in various chapters of my thesis. And some of them have been have been points of criticism from 1960s onwards, since the time Satyajit Ray screened his Pather Panchali. Whole lot of schools of thoughts and ideas and emerge. If you talk to the filmmakers, they have a different opinion altogether on some of these criticisms. So to go to the first question, which was asked on propaganda and artists, I'm not very sure. This is this requires perhaps a very detailed discussion. But if I can give you a quick answer, I'll try to make a distinction between good propaganda and bad propaganda. So I mean, if Shyam Benegal and if Govind Nihlani are propagandists, I think they need our support. This is not the most scholarly answer that I'm giving. I'm very well aware of it, but I would like to maybe say this at this point of time. And I think again to say, because I have spoken to some of these filmmakers, including Shyam Benegal and Syed Akhtar Mirza and M.S. Satyu, they don't regard themselves as propagandists. What they have told me, and I think if you read some of their interviews which they gave in 1970s and 80s, are very well recorded in many of these film magazines. they're answering some of these blames which are put them, that how they don't regard the audience. They make films for film festivals. Their stories are, as Pankaj was saying, their stories are very alienating. They don't connect with to the common people. Their gaze is very urban, and they're only telling rural stories to impress the foreign audience. But let me tell you, I mean, this is again kind of like representing their voice. They don't see it like this. Kumar Sahni, who is supposed to be one of the most difficult filmmakers of this new cinema movement, told me that anything that disturbs him around him, he picks up that, creates a story out of it, uses his own language of cinema and puts it on the screen. Shyam Benegal tells me that he doesn't think that new cinema is an elitist cinema. He tells that Taj Mahal is definitely not elitist. Anybody can go, and I know if you give the accessibility, anybody can go and enjoy the beauty of Taj Mahal. So he compares his cinema, or the cinema of new cinema, school of filmmaking, with some of these other pieces of art, etc. So filmmakers do not see themselves as propagandists. The key is they pick up any subject, any issue which they find disturbing. And they also very, very openly say that they are not there to give any solutions. They are only trying to help themselves by making a kind of cinema which helps them understand how life is out there and why is it like that. Solutions is, I think maybe there perhaps you can call them a little elitist, or a little snobbish, that they are not really giving the fantastical solutions which the quote-unquote commercial cinema tries to give you. So again, a distinction I would like to make between good propaganda and bad propaganda, if you are using the word propaganda there. About Pankaj's questions, but thank you for your compliments and liking the presentation. Again, there's quite a lot which can be said, and there is no clear-cut answer to some of the things that you have said. Though I agree with your point that how some films like Party or certain films like the kind of films Manikal or Kumar Sahni makes, is pretty alienating. As you rightly pointed out, the people who are good in Hindi or who deal with Doordarshan or All India Radio can understand that kind of a language. But then again, that we forget a very crucial point, and many of these filmmakers have also faced this, are these films being enabled? Is the government or the people, the connoisseurs of art cinema, are they enabling, facilitating the screening of these films to these audience that they're so worried about? You are very worried about the audience, but then when it comes to helping these films reach out to them, you don't take any initiative. So that is a question which I think these filmmakers ask as a counter question. But the people who are worried about why I make this kind of cinema which they find alienating, and they worry so much about the audience, and they themselves do not mind sharing all kind of crude themes and cinema treatment, etc., in front of these audience, which they call as a mass audience. So again, I think the central focal point for me, for many of these filmmakers, and maybe I'm sounding like their representative here, is the whole issue of exhibition, helping these films reach out. These films have not reached out to the screen or to film societies, etc. I'll tell you one instance. This is again not directly answering your question, Pankaj, but Shyam Benegal was asked a question that he makes films like Ankur, Nishant, etc., which only caters to the needs of a particular audience. He shared this detail that how his film was shown in a particular factory in front of working class, and they reacted the way nobody had reacted to that film so far. This is again 1970s, or I think sometime 1980s. And he also shares this detail that how he got a letter from a Dalit woman who either she must have written it or she must have asked somebody else to write it for her. That she somewhere watched Ankur and she felt so connected and she was so happy that somebody in Bombay is making a film on their life. This is just one instance. Shyam Benegal saying this about Ankur, which I think Madhu Prasad has highly criticized. So yeah, some of these films can be alienating, but then again, the debate goes to the whole issue of exhibition and helping these films reach out to the common audience. Maybe then the discourse perhaps might change and some new kind of criticisms will emerge on new cinema. About Anushka's question on women's movement, I do agree, especially when you mentioned Akrosh's presentation. I do agree with some of those criticisms, and in fact, I will add one more film to the list. That if you see Bhumika, Shyam Benegal's Bhumika, that also some of those scenes of domestic violences can be pretty politically incorrect and can be pretty much criticized from the contemporary lens. The way he has shown the relationship between Amol Palekar and Smita Patil's relationship. So yeah, those criticisms are, I think, valid, but yeah. Then again, I missed that slide, which I used in my PowerPoint. There is a women researchers got together and they chose a particular method of researching media called, sorry for the pronunciation, but let me spell it. It's called BECHDEL, Bechdel test. It's some sort of a test which the media practitioners can conduct. And they found that the parallel cinema has portrayed women as in a far better light than the commercial cinema has ever done. So we will have to check their research method, how they are saying it. But Anushka, I will totally agree. I have been aware of some of those debates, some of those concerns raised by women activists, NGOs, etc. Again, some of the films that you cited, and I could also think about Bhumika. But I'm not sure. Of course, one has a right to criticize. I have my opinions on that, and it's a very valid criticism. Yeah. So,
sorry, that was Prabha's question. Just to yeah.
Sorry. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was wondering why you didn't mention two persons, Kalpana Lajmi, especially earlier films, Ek Pal, and also this lady, the director of Chashme Vaddoor.
Sai Paranjpe. Yeah.
Right.
So I think these two female directors' movies may be very important pointers to what possibilities lay within the new cinema.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, if we say art cinema has actually provided quite a good platform for women filmmakers. If we compare with the classical narrative cinema or Bombay-based commercial Hindi cinema industry, some of these women filmmakers have done far better in the middle-class cinema or middle cinema, movement. So Sai Paranjpe is one. I think there are a couple of more there. Somebody who made Aruna Desai or somebody like that. I'm forgetting her name, but yeah, there are a couple of them. They feature in my PhD definitely. But for today's purpose, I think maybe you can judge me why I didn't include women filmmakers. You can do some sort of psychoanalysis, but they are there. I'm aware of those debates, and they are there in my research. Yes. Yeah. Can I just if I have time, and maybe can I just quickly read out this quotation from Kalpana Lajmi, which I wanted to, but because of lack of time, I didn't. Now that we're talking and I'm liking it, so can I just quickly maybe that could be the last.
Yes, ma'am. Please, ma'am.
Okay. So and this is again to maybe I think who was I think I'm forgetting the name. Somebody who asked me a question on how filmmakers choose their stories and the whole issue of propaganda, etc. So maybe this could be one partial answer to that question. The first question which was asked, was it Anushka? Was it you who asked me that question?
Yes, she asked. Yeah.
All right. Yes. Sure. So Kalpana Lajmi tells in one of the interviews, on Rudali. So Dimple Kapadia plays the role of Shanichari, and I'm quoting Kalpana Lajmi. She says that I developed Shanichari into the conscience keeper of the village. The village encompasses the aptitude of society at various levels. The perennially exploited untouchable, the changing face of the zamindari, the emergence of the small trader and broker, the inevitable presence of the prostitute, and the pivotal role of religious hypocrisy in the guard of the priest. All these are linked together during the ritual of death, the mourning. So when you talk to the filmmakers, that's how their stories emerge. They just look at their surroundings, they pick up any stories that happens. Akrosh was a result of such a immediate response to something that has happened in remote village of Maharashtra, and Govind Nihlani and Vijay Tendulkar started writing a story on that because they saw some potential in sharing the story with the larger world and creating a discourse on violence, which is depicted through silence. So yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Do we have any other question?
Thank you very much. This was, I have to taken maybe 15 minutes extra, but thank you for waiting for the question answer also and giving me some of these important inputs. Maybe I can go back to them and try to formulate my own more scholarly academic answers to that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you to you for taking out the time and answering all our questions so patiently. And I would now request Ayushi to propose the vote of thanks, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, ma'am, for delivering this wonderful talk, as I before mentioned. And we will, it is a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to you, ma'am. We would like to express a heartfelt gratitude for an enlightful talk. It was really an honor listening you and your insightful lecture. We are glad that you took out time from your busy schedule for joining us today. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the entire history department, the faculty and the students who joined us today.